Hello everybody, and a very good afternoon to you all, and good morning to those of you joining us from the United States and Canada. We've had an amazing response to this webinar with people registering from all corners of the globe: Brazil, Colombia, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, South Africa, and many other places too. I'm not sure if, due to the time zone differences, all of those people are actually joining us at the moment, or are just happy to receive the recording we'll be sending out in a few days' time. But if you are with us now, a very good welcome to you all. I'm Roddy Millar, Editorial Director at IEDP Developing Leaders, and I'm delighted to be hosting this webinar with John Davis of MIT Sloan School of Management. I'll introduce John in a few moments, but I would like to give a couple more minutes for any attendees who have not got here to join us. While we wait, let me give you a bit of background to IEDP Developing Leaders and what we do. I'm hoping that many of you will already know us for the website iedp.com and also our magazine Developing Leaders, which we've now been publishing for over 8 years. Last week, excitingly, we launched a dedicated free-to-access website for the magazine, complete with all our back issues, and you can find that at developingleadersquarterly.com. IEDP has been going for almost 15 years now, publishing information and reporting on the best in corporate learning practice, with our special focus on how large organizations work and use the research and executive programs offered by the top tier of global business schools and their thought-leading faculty. Business schools are hotbeds of new thinking and research, and we have a constant stream of new ideas and practices flowing from our network of schools around the globe. If you've not done so before, please do sign up on our website to receive our regular newsletters and articles and invitations to other online events like this one. I'd also like to mention our sister website, ideasforleaders.com, that creates short summaries of the latest academic research papers for these schools and others on and around leadership and management practice. If these are topics that interest you, I encourage you to take a look or drop me an email at editor@iedp.com to find out more. Okay, that's enough about us. Let's get on with today. I see we've got a good number of people with us now, so on to the main show. It's great that so many of you from around the world are joining us and engaging with our content. You're all very welcome, and I'm sure you will find today really valuable. I'm thrilled to introduce today's speaker, John Davis. John is a globally recognized authority on family business, family wealth, and family offices. He leads the family enterprise programs at the MIT Sloan School of Management, where he teaches strategies for family enterprises to position themselves for the future. John's trained in management, psychology, and economics, and advises multi-generational families from more than 70 countries. He delivers keynote addresses around the world, including the World Economic Forum. He's also chairman and founder of the Cambridge Institute for Family Enterprise. Currently, MIT are running 2 family enterprise programs that are being led by John. In May, they have Future Family Enterprise Sustaining Multi-Generational Success, a new program for multi-generational families to combat the risk highlighted by current research that family enterprise often derail within 3 generations. And in July, John leads Founder to Family, Sustaining Family Business Success, a program that looks specifically at the transition of a business from the original startup founder to the next generation, and the particular issues and conversations that can involve. To find out more about these programs and others at MIT Executive Education, please visit their website at the address on the screen now. A few housekeeping items before we begin the session. This webinar, as I said, is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to everyone who registered next week. John will speak for 25 to 30 minutes, after which we have a chance to join the conversation and ask questions. I really encourage you to do this, so please type in any questions you may have for John during the presentation into the chat panel on the screen, and I'll select as many as I can to put to him. And if I don't manage to get to your question, or you wish to contact him after the webinar finishes, you can reach him through his website, johndavis.com, that's on the screen as well. That's quite enough housekeeping from me, but before I hand over to John, he and I wanted to run a quick poll to gain an idea about you, the audience's engagement with the family enterprise. sector. So please take a moment to answer the question I'm just about to put on the screen now. There we go. And we'll see what your responses are. Well, 20% of you have voted so far. It's going up quickly now. That's great. I'll leave it for another 10 seconds or so. Any more coming in? That's 82%. We're probably about there. Okay, so I close the poll and we share those on the screen. And you should see, you can see those, John, can you?
I can, Roddy.
Excellent. Well, with that, let me now hand over to you. So I'm delighted to pass the baton over to John Davis, and we'll take your questions later. So let me just hand you the screen, John. There we go.
Okay. So over to me. And Roddy, thank you and IEDP for hosting this webinar, and welcome everybody. We're going to talk about long-term success and sustainability, and I'll start with probably the most popular viewpoint on, there we go, on this whole topic, which is the 3-generation rule. Every country seems to have a version of this, and I've been in a lot of countries working with families, speaking, doing both my academic and advisory work, and they all say approximately the same thing, that within a few generations, a family that becomes successful, and typically meant to be financially successful, loses its success. I have, over the last 15 years, been trying to understand, number one, is this old folk wisdom, which, by the way, you know, was generated independently in 20, 40 countries, and sometimes over years, has you know, never been really fully substantiated. And the truth of the matter is that in fact you have 3 different paths that occur once a family becomes successful. The first is the well-known 3-generation path. Okay, there we go. Now I'm on. The first is the 3-generation path, where wealth goes up and then comes down in a more or less gradual way. And we think about 2/3 of all families, in fact, follow this path. But there's a faster way to lose your wealth, which we call the quick descent path. And we've studied as well the variety of reasons, individually and in combination, that lead a family to lose its wealth quickly. And then the remainder, maybe perhaps 20%, although we think it's growing, follow the quick descent path. And then the regeneration path, those families that regenerate their wealth over generations, once it's started, once it's been established, We think that's maybe 15% of the families. Now, one interesting question for our discussion today is, are the percentages between the three-generation path, three-generation rule path, quick descent, and regeneration, are those changing at this point? We think that in general, regenerating one's family's wealth and sustaining success in general is becoming harder, not easier, and I'm going to try to explain what I mean by that. We also know that most wealth, significant wealth, is because of owning, operating businesses. In one study that I did not too long ago, 85% of all of the families that were in my sample of wealthy families had operating companies. So we need to understand the sustainability of operating businesses as well. And what we know is that historically about 1 out of 6, maybe 1 out of 7 businesses lasts a full generation. And if you take, of those, if you take the family companies and you take 100 family companies that have survived 1 full generation, by the end of the 2nd generation, there are only about 30 left. By the end of the 3rd, we're down to half that number, and then approximately 10 or 10% of those that lasted 1 full generation make it a full 4 generations. The reasons are varied why family companies fail. Now, it's true that some of the drop from 100 to 30 to 15 to 10 is because some family companies were sold. And in fact, they could be sold to other families or family companies and remain a family company, but in a different family's hands. But in reality, the number of businesses that are sold it's a small number. So most of the drop in the number of surviving family companies is the result of failure of one kind or another. The two diagrams here, the family business sustainability or mortality curve, as I call it, and the 3-generation wealth paths analysis shows that sustainability is a very hard thing to do, and we're talking historically. One company that seems to have done it well, family company that seems to have sustained itself very well, is Cox Enterprises. And it's a diversified company, but around an information theme. And if you take a look at historically how family companies have typically survived, it's because they try to scale as much as they can, and then at appropriate times diversify into new growth areas. And this strategy historically has accounted for most of the family companies that I've been able to attract or track in terms of sustainability. There's another approach, a less common one, represented by the Steinbeck family in Sweden, where the founder gets into a couple of very reliable and scalable industries in the 1930s. His son, Jan Steinbeck, comes along, sells his dad's forestry and agriculture businesses, and launches into steel, auto, telecommunications. Jan unfortunately dies at an early age. His daughter, Christina, pursues the same strategy as her dad. She sells her after studying, not impulsively, but after studying not only the market opportunity, but what she thought she could be good at. Sells steel, auto, telecommunications, and gets into entertainment and e-commerce. This path, reinvention, is a bolder path, but I think that we're actually going to see more of the reinvention path in the future because industries are getting older, more mature, and less attractive sooner. And there's plenty of disruption actually crippling or eliminating certain industries so that you have more of a motivation to switch in and out of lines of business in a much more discreet way than we've ever seen historically. If you take a look at the companies that do survive and families that do survive over generations, there's a very reliable formula or framework that can explain success and failure. And that's that in order to survive, you need to keep growing your assets, building useful talent, and maintaining unity. And this, of course, happens through or by way of having effective leadership, good structures, good ownership structure, good governance structures, and the right amount of the right resources. And not just financial resources, but also good reputation, good talent sources, good alliances, a variety of resources that help you build your organization. This formula has always been true as when I go back historically and look at family companies and also families that survive over time. And I believe it continues to be true, but the practices, the specific practices that one must be good at to sustain a family company or to sustain a family in business over time, they're changing. And I'm going to explain what I'm observing. One of the most important features of this model is the word that just appeared, momentum. It's always been true that if you lag behind, if you stall out in the growth of resources, in the development of talent, or in the building of unity, you can be in big trouble. It's more true today than ever before because the windows of opportunity facing both families and companies are many, but they tend to close faster today than they ever have. And if you fall behind in growing assets, if you don't have the right talent in place or good methods for developing talent, if your unity is fractured and you haven't done enough to bring people together, develop consensus, develop alignment around where you want to go, you don't have long to correct those problems. And problems today in these three areas are more risky, more detrimental than ever before. We also know that families that sustain themselves tend to have good organizations. They tend to organize themselves in a way so that they can more reliably and analytically understand their situation and be well organized to address the needs of their companies, of their other assets, and to maintain unity. I'll come back and we'll talk more about this. Today we're in a VUCA world. Now, if anybody at this point hasn't heard this term, VUCA, learn it, because you'll hear it in just about every conference you go to. At the World Economic Forum recently, in about every session, somebody was using this term VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And if you don't happen to get to a conference soon, it's really good at cocktail parties as well. So this is the encapsulation of what both families and companies today are facing. And I characterize this as four important forces in the world today that are acting on society, family life, company life, and each of these has within it forces and conditions that require us to change, to adapt, to modernize, to problem solve in important ways. And these are often today acting in tandem. Environmental degradation acting with technological advances, fueled by the globalization process, in combination with socio-political economic forces like, you know, the increasing dysfunction in governments, the widening income and wealth gaps and education gaps, the new interests and trends that you see with the millennial generation and how they're affecting not only the consumption aspect of any industry, but also employment. So these forces are acting on us, and we have to be ready to understand them and to adapt to them. They're creating disruptive forces that lead to plenty of bankruptcies, going out of business of well-known brands, but also the creation of new companies, new ways of doing business. And so this is just one aspect that we're dealing with today in family enterprise. Let me give you another. This has to do with the increased longevity of people, but also the changing expectations in younger generations about their promotability and their readiness to assume responsibility. What we saw historically was that senior leaders of companies, including family companies, would typically step back, retire from active management, typically in this age range. Junior generation or successors would typically expect to lead an organization somewhere in this age range, and there was often a comfortable period of time that met the expectations of both generations when the baton could pass. Think about what's happening today. The senior generation is living longer, having a longer vital life, and their expectations or desires around when they should step back are being pushed to the right. They're getting older. While the younger generation believes they're ready earlier. And what we're finding in more and more situations, because of these natural and to a large extent laudatory changes, is that the window of opportunity for a comfortable transition is either shrinking or disappearing. Number three factor that I'll mention today, The modern family is developing in a different way and has today some interesting new characteristics. Mobile, geographically dispersed, far less attached to their country of origin. They shop the world for education, economic opportunities, lifestyle, partnerships. There seems to be an increasing loyalty to self rather than the extended family. I see this in every corner of the world I work in. There's definitely more of a competition for the next generation's attention. They have lots of opportunities that they recognize and we recognize, and it's harder to get them to do the things that the family finds traditionally useful. Families today are more and more a mix of both working and leisure members. There's also quite a bit of pressure on wealthy families, business families, to engage in positive social change and an increased concern, as is healthy, with anonymity and privacy, etc., and even physical safety. So yet another change that the world is presenting us that affects family enterprise. The result of all of this is that we know that the future will be very different. One of the reasons that I'm very happy to be at MIT is because my colleagues at the school are studying so many aspects of these factors and trying to understand what the future will look like. My job at MIT is to think about how all of these changes are affecting family enterprise. How do family companies fare in this new world? Well, their long-term approach that family companies have, in part, allowed by their financial stability. The fact that if you take a look, if you compare the balance sheets of family companies and non-family companies, the amount of debt held by these two different kinds of organizations, family companies are far stronger. Long-term approach, financial stability, their quality focus, they're greater, and this has been demonstrated in a number of studies, greater innovation, and also their dedication to their community and to values. Their family companies are wired in these ways to be strong in the emerging world. These are all things that the world is valuing more and more, but family companies also have a number of vulnerabilities that become glaringly obvious in this new world. A control focus, not only ownership control, but operational control. Wanting to keep control even over small decisions in the organization, it prevents agility and prevents the seeking of well-funded opportunities. An operator mindset that I'll explain in a bit. Talent constraints, the inability to attract talent in a world where talent, in my view, is the #1 success factor in organizations. The reluctance to let go in a timely way, not just of the CEO role, but of companies and practices that are no longer working well. And the preference for slower change. You know, I used to say, with a lot of empirical evidence behind me, that in fact, family companies were slower, but they were also better, higher performing. But a very valid question today is, can you be slower and better? I no longer know. But what I'm telling my clients and my students is, you need to build organizations, have the right talent in place, and the right attitudes, the right management philosophy, so you can be highly agile, highly adaptive, and migrate into opportunities that are really important for you and out of old businesses and old practices that no longer work. So what are the practices that I think matter now? First of all, heightened awareness and realism. It used to be in the traditional world that moved much less quickly, that you could be a master of your business, really understand the operating features, the customers, the technology, etc. And your focus could be largely there. And you were living in a bubble that for many generations worked pretty well. That's no longer adequate. You have to become industry savvy. You've got to get altitude and understand what's happening in your industry, in your local, regional, international economy, and to understand that everything that is happening today can affect your family and your business. And when I take a look at companies that don't adjust well and go out of business, one of the recurring obvious things that you can see is that, you know, everybody says, oh, well, business is moving so fast, it's understandable that, you know, that Blockbuster went out of business, or that taxis were disrupted by Uber. Yeah, that's not true. It's not that industries are moving so fast that companies don't have time to adjust and adapt. That's not the case. Owners, boards, leaders, they see their industries changing, but they choose to believe that changes won't affect their company. They're not being realistic about what can and will be affecting and even disrupting your way of doing business and your family and family life. More and more, we need to ask ourselves, what are we really trying to accomplish? Not what businesses are we in, or how do we want to run our businesses? Good questions, but more, we have to think about our purpose, our mission, because with a sense of mission, you can be more agile. You can get in and out of activities. You can adopt and let go of practices because you have a sense of ultimate purpose. So you can be more agile, and with agility comes the opportunity to maintain momentum, which has never been more important. So I remind families that because businesses come and go, what you have today in a particular business may not be useful, may not be valued in a short time, or it might still be valued, but you may not be the right owner of that line of business. So families more and more need to consider themselves stewards, not just of particular businesses, but of their assets and the values, their approach to doing things. In pursuit of a compelling mission, what are we really trying to do as a family and as an enterprising family? Which gives families the very wide latitude to define their activities in any generation. More and more, if you understand your mission, your values, and what you're good at, you can decide, you can make good choices about where to grow. Without knowing these three things, we're shooting in the dark. And ask yourself, how recently have we sat down and asked the fundamental question, what are we good at? What are we good at doing? And how does that compare to our growth opportunities? And what we want to accomplish and our way of doing things. If you can sit with your family or sit with your client and ask them these questions, you can do a lot of good. It used to be that what you needed to be good at didn't change as quickly. Growth opportunities didn't change as quickly. Your family's mission and your values didn't need to adjust much, but now they do. And we have to be good at asking and answering this question. Next, we need to get owners to think more like owners. The truth is that most owners have an operator's mindset. What they truly love when they own a company is making it better. And we know that family companies are better at innovation. Family owners love to tinker, to adjust, to perfect what they do. And operational excellence, I'm not dismissing it, it's always important. But you also need to complement an operator's mindset with an owner's mindset. What should we own? What are we good at owning? What should our portfolio consist of? What returns of various kinds do we want from what we own? How do we govern all of this? How do we find the best talent to manage all of this? Owners need to think more in this way. And to think in this way, they have to get altitude. They have to disconnect themselves a bit periodically from running their company to owning it well. Families need to be talent machines in the future, I like to say, meaning that they have to be good at figuring out the kind of talent that they need within their family and outside their family to do the activities that they think are important to pursue the mission that they're after. What to do about it? At MIT, we've launched a couple of programs for family companies, families that have enterprises of various kinds. You might have a family office, not an operating company. You might be in a family enterprise that does a lot of philanthropy as well as investing assets. But if you do things together as a family, we're offering two programs. The one on the left, Future Family Enterprise, are for families that have reached generation 2, 3, or later, and they face their own set of issues. Or on the right, founder stage families that are at various points in transitioning into the second generation. Each of these two sets of families have pretty distinct issues, which is why we offer separate programs here, but they're all facing the issues of how to get successfully into the future, which involves dealing with some of the issues that I've tried to outline here. Roddy, let me go back to you at this point.
Fantastic, John. That was superb, and a rapid tour of. We cover a great deal of ground there, from family succession through the speed of change of business at the moment, and purpose and values, and founders' mindsets as well, which is superb. Thank you very much for that. And I see that we've got a good selection of questions coming in already, but please let me just remind everyone that this is your chance. We've got about 20 minutes left to put some questions to John and get his insights on those. I'm going to kick off with a couple that I've picked out. And you John, you mentioned in one of those slides around stewardship of or the concept of being a steward of family assets and values. And I mean, that's an area that is being very much explored, I think, by lots of public companies these days, not family-owned companies, and they're very keen to understand that stewardship. And it clearly plays into the idea of longer-term time horizons than they're forced to report to. It's easier to have a stewardship approach if you don't have to report every quarter, I suspect. But what can family businesses teach others, do you think, about this kind of approach?
Actually, quite a bit. The appearance now of this it's called long-termism. This new approach that public companies have discovered, non-family public companies have discovered, about thinking, planning, investing, nurturing organizations to achieve more over the long term, as opposed to being short-term, even quarterly focused. These public companies act like they've discovered this philosophy, but this has actually been a philosophy forever in most family companies, because family companies tend to think much further out, even generationally, when they're planning for the future. You will see family companies investing in activities today that maybe only the next generation are going to be able to harvest. So to have a long-term approach to one's business and also to one's family, it helps enormously if the owners and the broader family think like stewards. And the steward mentality is one where, you think about, how do I grow this, the value of this, the economic value, the social value, the reputational value of what we have, and get it into the future. That's the mentality of a steward. And if you've cultivated that among your owners especially, but even the broader family, things work far better. Now, the big question, and this is the change that we're seeing now in the future, what should we be a steward of? My advice is, you don't want to focus on a specific business or business line to steward. You want to think about two things. I want to steward the value of what we're creating in general. The particular businesses, the particular activities, we may have to change those. Some businesses may go away. Other businesses may decrease in terms of their returns of various kinds. So we have to be flexible in terms of what we own and also our practices, but the creation of value, economic value, social value, reputational value, etc. That's what I'm going to steward. And we're also going to steward our important values, or our approach, how we do things, how we treat stakeholders, how we invest for the future, how we behave ethically, for example. So value and values, Roddy, that's what you need to really focus on stewarding.
Now that's really interesting, and I think it plays very much into. I was struck by many things that you say, but time prevents me from going on about too many of them. But the Steinbeck family that you illustrated there, and how each generation had a completely different focus. And it seems to me that what they're doing is really, it's about asset allocation rather than building on any expertise itself. But now what you've just said in that previous answer also suggests that they're bringing in those, or they, I don't know whether they are or not, but they should be bringing in the values that originated with the grandfather as are being displayed by the granddaughter.
Yeah, precisely. And if you look back over the generations in the Steinbeck family, you see remarkable similarities in the entrepreneurial attitude, the care for the environment, the ability to develop good networks and partnerships. The approach over generations is remarkably consistent. It's just that they've switched out activities because they've asked the important questions. What's our mission? What are we good at? What are we interested in? And what are the growth opportunities? And that family has migrated usefully, very usefully so far, into activities that where they're actually looking at those three overlapping circles and saying, okay, bullseye, this is what we can do well. It's growing, and we can use our approach here.
Yeah. Well, it's an approach that Warren Buffett has used very, very good. Whether that's a family business or not, I'm not sure, but he's always cast himself as being an asset allocator rather than an expert in any of the individual organizations that Berkshire Hathaway owns.
Precisely.
Before we open up the questions, that you also use that phrase where can you be slower and better? And I think that's a really fascinating question of our time at the moment, where everything seems to be getting faster and faster and faster. I mean, given that family enterprises do have this longer time horizon to play with than many companies, is that an opportunity or is it a false opportunity? Can it be a trap?
Well, you know, what family companies tend to make good forward investments. They tend to. Everybody who makes investments will make mistakes. Well, some will be good, some are okay, some are bad. What family companies tend to be particularly slow at, Roddy, is getting out of bad bets, bad economic bets, and bad bets on people. They tend to be terribly slow, resistant to getting out of bad bets. And that's what I'm really trying to work with families to improve on, to create policies and checks and balances in their organizations so that they can remove themselves from bad bets so that they can focus more on what's working. And it's very important that all organizations learn to speed up. Now, you have to speed up in the context of what we're really trying to accomplish and our approach. But you need to loosen up some of the controls that you've got so you can be more experimental, and you can delegate more of the decision making and action taking so you can stay up with the speed of the world. And family companies simply have to get on board with these new strategies, new practices.
Okay. Brilliant. Well, let's take some of these questions from the audience. I've got one here from Gustavo, who says, with current, and this relates to the diagram you put up, with current generations stepping down later, how can newer generations who are more quick to change and transform make their expectations, points of view to be considered in the company's strategy?
Yeah. There are two pieces to this. We have to work with the senior generation to delegate some activities into the next generation, both next generation of the family and next generation of the non-family, to allow them to experiment, to change, to test, and to grow new areas. The senior generation has got to put processes in place where they can trust the next generation to do some of that. Otherwise, we're simply going to lose that talent, and we're going to not be able to act quick enough to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves to us. The next generation, the younger generation, has got to be able to demonstrate two things: respect for the values or approach of the company, and an appreciation for the accumulated wisdom that comes with being in business or in life for a while, and make the argument, we're ready to try something new here. Give us the responsibility with appropriate accountability, and let us try. That dialogue in family businesses and in families is more critical today. It's always been the tension between in society and within families and family companies. The younger generation has always wanted to do new things, and has pushed on their new ideas to the senior generation. The fact that the senior generation was slower at letting the younger generation do things, hurt morale and motivation and momentum a bit, but it wasn't as crippling a generation ago as it can be today. So the dialogue between generations to allow this accommodation is more than important. It's vital. And it's something that we're trying to achieve at the client level, but also in these programs that we're running.
Okay. And there are a couple of questions coming in here, which I think are sort of peripheral to that, around family members, next generation members who aren't yet in the business or are needing to be brought into the business. And the question here from Joy, which goes, how do you motivate the next generation to educate and inform themselves and become active or at least involved shareholders? So that's not necessarily suggesting a management role itself, but as a supervisory sort of engaged role. And in tandem, we've got one here from Michael who says, what can parents do to make sure they don't accidentally trap their children in the business, which presumably is a high risk?
Well, Michael's concern, it's a typical parental concern, wanting to give good latitude to the next generation. Let me approach that one first, and I'll go back to the ownership, developing good owners question. It's an important, understandable desire on the part of parents to give their children maximum latitude, but there's also a vulnerability in that attitude. Not everybody wants to work in a family business. Not everybody even wants to be an owner of a family company or deserves to be an owner of a family company. My daughter may want to be a CEO. My son may want to be a violinist. Okay, well, I understand. But one of the things families all over the world, but this is more true in the West than it is in the East, a little bit more true, is that parents have stopped reminding their children that they have a responsibility to their families. Our job in our family is to launch you into adulthood so you can live a good life. Great. But don't forget that you, son, daughter, have a responsibility back to us. And that message of the responsibility back to the family, that was once, generations ago, the predominant message to the next generation. And then, yes, you can do some of what you want in your life. Now we've flipped it, and parents are so tentative, shy, about reminding their kids about their responsibilities back that we've somehow distorted what families are about. So I want to see both messages sent by parents to their kids. Now, on the question of developing good owners, I am so happy that this question came up. It is a profoundly important question because families often think, you know, if I can just develop one of my next generation to be a good leader of what we have, we're all set. It's what I call the theory of one, and it's really misguided because what we know is that we have to develop a team of good owners in the next generation. And if somebody can't, won't, doesn't want to be a good owner in the next generation, please buy them out, give them something else. Don't trap them, but don't saddle the other family members with somebody who won't be a good team player. And then teach these next generation members the responsibilities of ownership. Teach them that ownership is a job. And we could go into great detail. I know we don't have time at this point, but great detail on what the proper role of owners is and how you develop from young ages to adult ages people who can be good supportive owners, some who can be what we call active owners, people that are really understanding and engaged around the big ownership decisions, and even good wealth creators for the family. There are lots of different important roles, ownership roles that people can play, and especially because families have to learn to be good, have an owner's mindset. Very, very important question.
And I think there's another one which has cropped up in we've got masses of questions here, and I'm afraid we're not going to be able to get through even a small percentage of them. But a couple I've seen here is around that selling mindset, the fact that when is the right time to sell. And I think Daniel here, it puts it nicely. Not all families are meant to stay in business together forever. And this is especially true when family unity is at risk and when there's a loss of shared conviction around the mission. When does one know it's the right time to sell and unwind the family enterprise? I mean, that's a huge question, and you've got about 90 seconds to answer it. But
well, let me thank Daniel for that good question and say that there are two things I would consider. First of all, you need to periodically, every few years, be thinking about, are we the right owner of this or that? And what is the value of any line of business that we have to us? You need to go through that rethinking, because then if somebody approaches you, or you understand for other reasons that this is the time to leave, you're better prepared to do it. And so the right time to sell is when you have a good buyer coming to you and saying, we want this, we'll take good care of it, you'll get a good price, and you can then go on to do other things that you're better able to do.
Brilliant. And I do want to get in one final question from Martin, who, despite his name, is actually based in China. And he is, how can family businesses manage the transition to higher levels of value creation technology upgrading? And he goes on, many family businesses have exceeded in the past, but now face growing competition from lower cost regions, as well as needing to develop their own technological and managerial capability. So that sort of threat from undercutting from the cheaper areas of production around the world.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this comes from a listener in China who are also finding that they're being undercut now with cheaper labor and cheaper technology. And one quick response to this, Roddy, this is going to continue. You're always vulnerable in business today to somebody who can do it cheaper and faster. You need to be aware of that and to understand how that affects the life cycle of whatever you're doing. And you need to be prepared. Not only do you need to update and try to stay in the game, but you need to know when the game has moved to a different league and you're no longer able to play in that league, and then it's better to move out of that game and into something else that you can do well.
Fascinating. John, I'm afraid time has caught up with us, and we're amazingly at the close of the hour. It's gone very rapidly. Thank you so much. It was a brilliant insight into a lot of these issues, and I apologize to the audience who we didn't manage to get to their questions. But as I said, I'm sure they can reach out to you through those links we had earlier if they want to specifically get in touch.
Well, thank you, Roddy, and thank you for hosting this conversation, and I look forward to staying in touch with all of you who are listening, and do pay attention to what we're doing at MIT. It's exciting, and I'm very proud to be a part of that team now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John Davis, and thank you all for listening. We have got a number of other webinars coming up in the next few weeks, so please have a quick click on iedp.com and see which ones are of interest to you, and we hope to see you with us again soon. But John Davis, thank you very much indeed. That was superb.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Bye.